Hello everyone, my name is Mike and welcome to Potter's Bluff. Ooh, this is the Bored Cyborg. During the 70s, times were a-changing in regard to horror cinema. The Exorcist came out in '73 and disgusted people to the point of nausea. It was violent, offensive, revolting, sacrilegious, and f***ing beautiful. A year later, Texas Chainsaw Massacre ripped through theaters and scared people shitless in broad daylight. Then Halloween came out in '78 and changed the slasher game forever. Oh wait, that was Psycho. Finally, a year later, a certain air of classiness was injected back into horror cinema with Ridley Scott's Alien. Horror was bigger, badder, and scarier than ever. It was the resurgence of the genre's glory days, harkening back to the Universal Monsters era. Ronald Shusett, who helped write the story for Alien alongside its main creative force Dan O'Bannon, discovered a little story written by Jeff Miller and Alex Stern. That story was dead and buried. Well, not literally. Shusett asked O'Bannon to look over their script and make sure it was structurally sound. O'Bannon worked some of his doctoral magic and thus was born the final draft for Dead and Buried. Or so the legend goes. Actually, there are a bunch of conflicting stories I've read, but none of that matters anymore because what we're left with is one palpably chilling and underrated horror classic from the early 80s. Directed by Gary Sherman, who directed the forgotten British horror gem Deathline, aka Raw Meat in 1972, Dead and Buried was certainly inspired by the best episodes of The Twilight Zone, which is essentially every single episode. I could easily see this film in black and white, with Rod Serling busting down the fourth wall like the fucking Kool-Aid Man and introducing our oblivious protagonist. And the maddening twist at the end certainly falls in line with something The Twilight Zone would wallop you with at the last moment to ruin your night. The film also feels like it could have been released 20 years earlier during the Silver Age of horror. It just has that classic feel to it. You know that feel. That feel. Even Joe Renzetti's unnerving, Hitchcockian score is atmospheric and imbued with that classic vibe that Bernard Herrmann would be proud of. Speaking of atmosphere and dread, this film seeps of it. This is something that a lot of 60s horror films strived for in a time before the special effects revolution of the 70s. The fictional town of Potter's Bluff is a gloomy, foggy, and dreary New England coastal town. It's a town that feels as if it ceased progressing in the 40s and has now fallen victim to the unrelenting impetus of Father Time. The inhabitants of this quaint little town are equally interesting and enigmatic. The film opens up with a somber piano composition coupled with serene scenery and crashing waves. A young itinerant is doing some photography and all seems peaceful and quiet. And to quote Leo in Secret of the Ooze, perhaps a little too quiet.
Yeah, a little too quiet.
Then, a beautiful young woman comes out of the woodwork, seduces him, then assists a mob of tire iron-wielding townsfolk in brutally beating, snapping pictures of, and ultimately immolating the poor young chap. Nice folks. It's one of those I don't know what the f*** is happening, but I am in kind of intros. It bemuses and entrances and reels you in hook, line, and sinker. That's a mighty fine fish. I ain't never seen a fish like that before. As transients and the astray waft through town, they are offed one by an amorphous cloud of living, yet somehow lifeless townspeople. The twist is these poor bastards who are beaten beyond recognition and ruthlessly murdered re-emerge as perfectly intact residents of Potter's Bluff. The late Jack Albertson plays the town coroner and mortician William Dobbs in his final live-action feature film appearance. I grew up watching Jack Albertson as Charlie Bucket's Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but he had been around forever in TV and film alike. I also remember him from the classic Twilight Zone episode, The Shelter. Dobbs is another example of a character who just has that classic feel to him. You know, that feel. A character of the likes of something Vincent Price or Peter Cushing would have reveled in playing. The character is iconic in my mind, and his characterization is robust considering the little amount of screen time he's given. Every single scene he's in sheds a little more light on who he is and what he's all about. When he's introduced, he slowly approaches through a dense fog in a decked-out hearse with flashing lights and bullhorns bumping big band music. He even tells the town sheriff to shut the f*** up while the song finishes.
Where the hell?
Just a minute.
He's got thick-lensed glasses which look like they allow him to penetrate your soul with his gaze. He's tall and gaunt and innocently strides his way to villainy as the film progresses. James Ferrantino is our lead and plays Sheriff Dan Gillis. Like Albertson, Ferrantino worked mostly on television throughout his career but was no stranger to genre film. In fact, he even appeared in a couple episodes of Rod Serling's Night Gallery. There's definitely a pattern occurring here. He has an everyman look about him, and he's the one at the epicenter of the conspiracy plaguing Potter's Bluff. Like any good protagonist, he's the surrogate for all of the emotions that are to be evoked in the audience. We're just as confused and enchanted watching the film as he is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. His gradual descent into an unimaginable circumstance is executed with precision! And his performance is pretty strong too. When he loses it toward the end, you really feel for him. And his transformation is both fathomable and believable. There are also some memorable supporting characters. Most notably, a young, not quite baby-faced pre-Freddy Robert Englund plays one of the main townspeople. Unlike his wildly over-the-top character Buck from Tobe Hooper's '76 Grindhouse Sleaze Fest Eaten Alive, his character in Dead and Buried, Harry, is a creepily reserved one. Outside of Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund has always been an underrated and underappreciated character actor in my opinion, and it's always a pleasure seeing him pop up in genre films early on in his career. Another memorable performance is Lisa Blount's role as the seductress, or the killer nurse? She has a cold and chilling demeanor, but her beauty complements her emotionless expressions perfectly.
You had a very close call. You're gonna be all right. Yeah, just lie still.
Whereas every other character in the film has an ordinary, old American look about them, Blount's striking beauty stands out and instantly transfixes. There's also a memorable bit part by a guy who looks a lot like Harry Dean Stanton and evidently has an obsessive adoration for
boats. Show me, my friend, about boats.
He really likes boats.
I have spent my entire life in boats. Big boats. And all boats.
Okay, will somebody shut this guy up?
Oh, no.
Oh. Thanks. Along with the chilling atmosphere, engagingly enigmatic narrative, and memorable characters, the film also excels in special effects. A young guy by the name of Stan Winston designed all of the makeup effects in the film. You may know him as the guy who worked on such blockbuster hits as The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Relic, and Heartbeeps. Oh, sorry, those weren't the blockbusters. Let's see. Here we go. A few films called Aliens, Terminator 2, and Jurassic Park. Huh. Never heard of them. After getting his big break on a pretty cool TV movie of the week called Gargoyles in 1971 starring Bernie Casey, Winston worked throughout the 70s on multiple projects of various genres. Once the golden age of special effects hit during the 80s, that of which Winston helped usher in, he began focusing on makeup and creature effects in genre films like Oliver Stone's directorial debut The Hand, The Island, and even Friday the 13th Part 2. Then he was hired to work on Dead and Buried. The effects in the film are still Stan Winston to say. And even revolutionary for the time. I'm sorry I couldn't do that one with a straight face. Winston's work juxtaposed against the classic aesthetic and tone of the film meld together to create an entirely new beast. Winston worked quite a bit with clay models and puppetry in Dead and Buried, and some of the techniques he uses would likely trick most people watching it even today. You've got a charred head screaming bloody murder, a hypodermic needle to the eye, and my favorite, a time-lapse of Dobbs' character reconstructing one of the butchered transients. The scene reminds me a lot of Lon Chaney Jr. transforming into a werewolf in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which was the first full-faced werewolf transformation in cinema. In most horror films, we see faces and corpses rotting away, but here, Stan Winston does the opposite. The shot starts with a skeletal figure of the young woman and shows Dobbs applying the tendons, muscles, and skin through time-lapse photography, eventually eventually restoring her beauty. The effect had to be done with such precision that Stan Winston's hands are actually the ones applying the prosthetics in the scene. It's a great effect that had me scratching my head as to how it was accomplished. This is indicative of one hell of a timeless special effect. This was back when Winston was doing most of his own work and not relying on his crack team of special effects and makeup people that would make up Stan Winston's studio in the near future. The man was a monster! I also have to commend the utterly dreadful production design. The color palette of the film is fraught with doom and gloomy blues and grays. The only respite we get from the depressingly washed out colors is in the vibrant green grass of the cemetery. I see what the filmmakers did there, and it makes my nipples hard. There's a specific reason why I haven't delved too deep into the story of Dead and Buried, and that's because it deserves not to be spoiled. It's smartly structured and very well paced, with the filmmakers never giving you too much information as to what is truly going down in Potter's Bluff. Subtle clues and inklings are cleverly sprinkled throughout the narrative, and it consistently keeps you guessing. It's also rewarding upon repeated viewings, as I always find myself picking up more of those veiled hints each time through. I can confidently say that this is one of the most unique and underrated films of its genre and of its subgenre. Dead and Buried is a film that fans of horror cinema owe it to themselves to check out. If nothing else, I assure you the ending will stick with you like a hypodermic needle right to the eyeball. So come on down to Potter's Bluff and enjoy the dreary sights, lack of sounds, and a murderous mob of townspeople. Sounds nice, doesn't it? I just want to thank you all for checking out my review of the underrated early 80s horror classic Dead and Buried. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel and like what you saw and would like to see more videos like it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, as well as the little bell for notifications. What are some of your personal, underrated 80s horror films? Feel free to leave those in the comments below. I'd really enjoy taking a look at what you guys think. Anyways, guys, I will see you all next time. Bored Cyborg out. Eee.